Happy Pride, everyone. Welcome to Pride Book Fest. I am Phil Stamper. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the author of The Gravity of Us and As Far As You'll Take Me. I'm excited to welcome you to How to Craft Complex Queer Characters. The setup of this panel is a little different as there's no moderator, but I'll be facilitating the conversation. So if there are any awkward pauses, that's all on me. With all that said, today we're going to talk about, you guessed it, crafting complex queer characters. I'm going to introduce the other panelists who will say hello, give us their pronouns, and quickly introduce their books. And so, hello, everyone. Adam, do you want to start first? Tell us who you are.
Sure. Hi, I'm Adam Silvera. I'm the author of They Both Die at the End and the Infinity Cycle, which begins with Infinity Sun. It's super shiny, and then continues with Infinity Reaper, which is also super shiny. And the Infinity Cycle is my most recent works, and it takes place in alternate New York where magic is real and explores what happens when one brother gets magical powers, the other one doesn't. And my pronouns are he, him.
All right, Leah.
Hey everybody, I'm Leah Johnson. I'm the author of the books You Should See Me in a Crown and the forthcoming Rise to the Sun. I'm like trying to balance them together. You Should See Me in a Crown is about a girl named Liz Lighty who runs for prom queen for the scholarship that's attached to the crown so she can go to her dream school, and she falls in love with her competition for queen. And Rise to the Sun is about two girls who go to the music festival in search of one last epic weekend before embarking on the next chapter in their lives. And because it's a Leah Johnson novel, they also fall in love.
All right. And
my
Mark?
pronouns are she, her.
Oh, sorry. All right. Mark?
Hi. I'm so excited to do this. This is going to be great. So hi, everyone. My name is Mark Oshiro. I use alternately they, them, he, him pronouns. I am recently the author of Each of Us a Desert, my YA fantasy book, which is about a teenage girl who has the ability to pull stories out of people's bodies in order to cleanse them of their wrongdoing and then slowly learn that maybe her powers are not what she was told they were. And the forthcoming Insiders, my middle grade debut about, I basically pitch it as Room of Requirement from Harry Potter, but for queer and trans kids.
Amazing. And I'm Phil Stamper. I'm the author of The Gravity of Us and As Far As You'll Take Me. The Gravity of Us is, oh God, I haven't pitched this in a while, but it's a love story between two sons of astronauts whose lives are uprooted when their parents are kind of fighting for the same spot in the world's first human mission to Mars. And As Far As You'll Take Me follows 17-year-old Marty Pierce as he moves off to London to pursue his dream of being a professional musician. And along the way, makes a ton of bad decisions, but also finds this fun group of friends who become family and really figures out who he is. Which, as cliche as that sounds, is exactly what my experience was growing up, just I didn't do it in London. So I got to pretend by writing this book. And so that's all of our books. Hi, everyone. How's everyone doing today?
Great.
I love the energy of our group.
Yeah.
Really, really strong. Really coming in.
Before we hit record, it was like, how are you? And everyone's like, well,
Right.
Do you want the truth?
Yeah.
But now we're happy. We're peppy. We look at all this energy.
Yeah, I don't have back pains anymore. My neck is hurting there. I'm fully healed for this hour.
Yeah, if Adam just leaves the conversation, he hurt his back, so don't blame him.
Yes. I have
you
ice
could
on my back right now, so I might also get like really cold and jittery. So stay tuned.
watch him kind of crumble as the day goes on. Okay, so I have a few questions prepared, but because this panel is a little different in format, and the fact that I'm answering the questions too, feel free to jump in with any of your own questions. I think this is meant to be kind of a masterclass where we talk about crafting our characters and what choices we make when we do that. So I'm going to start with a pretty generic one, because it's easy to build off of. So I get this question all the time, and I think I answer it differently every single time I'm asked because I don't know. So it's really fun to spring on you all as well. But in your books, and you can just choose one book if you want, did you start by developing the plot, the setting, or the character? Kind of which came first, and how did you develop the rest? If anyone wants to jump in.
I can go. So I'll talk about They Both Die at the End because that's the only book my people care about. And kidding.
We care about all your
I'm
books.
brutally honest, so I'm fine.
I just want to say before you say anything else, Adam, that More Happy Than Not really changed my whole like
Thank you.
vision of like what
Don't
YA
say
could be.
sweet stuff to soothe my ego.
I know, but I just want you to know. I cried like a baby. I know everybody's like, oh, it's both at the end, it's so sad. The rest of these books are sad too. I don't know what y'all been reading.
Yeah,
I know, like guys, like that's my brand. Like
right.
you know, you bring like love stories. I'm like, I'm gonna make you cry. But I mean, for They Both, thank you, seriously, thank you. But for They Both Die at the End, for me, I had the concept and the title, which is like weird for me because I normally do start with character first. But what was interesting for me, and I say this as a queer creator, obviously, that like I had questioned whether or not there was going to be value in the market for a high concept story with like queer characters. And I remember thinking how big Fault in Our Stars was, right? I was like, are we ever going to get like a gay Fault in Our Stars? I'm like, okay, if I want to tap into that market that like had people crying, I should probably write about like a straight cis boy and a straight cis girl. And what stopped me was that I had two character names for the boy that I really liked. And I couldn't find a name for a girl that I really liked. So then I was like, what if I stopped playing this game and I just like choose to like write about like two queer boys instead? And then from there, the story and the characters like really started coming to life for me. And I'm a very character driven author. Like, I mean, this is literally about two boys like walking around the city until they die. Like, there's no plot. It's characters. So the characters is always like for me. How about you guys?
No plot, just vibes. I love that.
Yeah.
That's literally what it is.
Just sad vibes.
Yeah, very sad vibes. I am, up until Each of Us a Desert, I was always story first. I always think of story. I think in plot twists. I think of premises. And then, of course, when I wrote an incredibly intricate secondary world fantasy, I thought all the characters first, which made world building a nightmare. I'm going to recommend, if you're interested in writing like in a fantasy world, maybe come up with some rules first instead of just winging it and then being like, how does water work? How do people eat, or any of that? It was for me, but you know, if I could distill it down like you just did, Adam, I mean, Each of Us a Desert is two girls walk across the desert and fall in love. It's basically what it is. There is plot attached to it, and there's some other stuff, but like, I just really loved the idea, especially after what I did in Anger is a Gift. I really wanted happiness. I really wanted something. I mean, it's Mark Oshiro happiness. Let me stipulate, like, you're going to be happy, but you're also going to be like, I like writing books where you get to the end of it and you're just like, what is their address? I just want to talk to them. Like, I just want to have a conversation with you. Like, I don't stalk you. I just need to angrily talk to you about what you've done. So I wanted to write something about that, but specifically queer love. And in a world where queerness, there's just no friction and there's no conflict around homophobia and transphobia. If anything, it's beyond normalized. And so what does that look like? What is a love story, and how can it feel as grand as, like, when I think of, like, you know, what's his name's? And it's not a fantasy, you know, Aristotle and Dante discover secrets of the universe. Like, that feels epic in romance. Like, you know, oh God, there's another one coming out. I can't even deal with it. I can't. The sequel?
Oh, the sequel, yeah.
But I thought I was the one telling you that there was a sequel.
No. I was like, I'm not ready for it
anymore. I take it back.
Discover the Waters of the World or something, maybe?
Oh,
yeah.
I would never have been able to pull that out of my mind. But yes.
Yeah.
I think, and I mean, I know for a fact, I am a idea guy. You know what I mean? Like, my sister always says, oh, I'm the ideas guy. Like, I can't tell you how to execute it, but I can give you a great concept. And so one of the things that has been a thread that's run through all my books is that, like, what the story is going to be about comes to me before anything else. Where the story is set often comes later. Who's gonna be the vehicle that drives us through the story is going to arrive later. The emotional arc is something that comes in like the third draft. Like, I know the concept of the story before I know anything else. So for You Should See Me in a Crown, for instance, it was a Black girl joy story, full stop. Like, that was the point. It was going to be a book about Black girls' happiness. And then from there, it was like, okay, what if we take this idea about a Black girl running for prom queen in a small town, and then we sort of flip that on its head. Like, how can we complicate this narrative in a lot of different ways that we haven't seen it complicated before? And from there, I figured out, like, oh, Liz is the only person who can get us to where we need to go in the context of that world. And so Yeah, that's been the one consistent thing about my drafting process through all my books so far.
I love that. I feel like I've actually, so that's very similar to my process with The Gravity of Us, was like very much the idea driven. Like I packed literally every nerdy thing that I am obsessed with into the same book. Like there was all this conversation about like media elements and like who's telling the truth and how a teen would be the one to want to find what the truth is when all these adults are like okay with the status quo. And then the whole space race element to it was something that it's literally just taken from all of my many Life magazines from the 60s and 70s and all the documentaries that I've read. And I have a whole space shelf down here of like books from the space race. So like I was able to pull that all into like a relevant contemporary book. And that was something that I didn't think it was possible when I started. But then once I started writing it, I was like, oh my God, this is it. And I think that was because the character really drove the story, because it's such a nostalgic book. But if you put like someone who is so anti-nostalgia, well, kind of, who thinks he's so anti-nostalgia, but he also collects cassette tapes, so he's a big hypocrite like me. If you put him at like driving the story, it really like, to me, I thought that was like really compelling and fun and kept it fresh while I was writing it. But for As Far As You'll Take Me, I was really just like, this is Marty Pierce. This is a messy gay teen who I relate to a lot because it's like I put a little bit of my life in there. And I was like, what would be a great experience for someone who's like a rural Midwest gay to have? And that's like, oh, well, what if he moves to London? What if he studies music? Like I know how to talk about those things. So that was very character driven. So it's kind of weird to go back and forth. And like, I feel like mostly I'm going to gravitate to stories more like The Gravity of Us, but I had such a personal connection with Marty that I had to go with that for As Far As You'll Take Me.
I have a question for you guys. Just like hearing your responses to this already, because it seems like between like Mark and I, we're kind of like team like heavy hitters, and like Phil and Leah, you're like team do-gooders, you know, and like and we're talking about like the craft specifically in like writing like queer characters, right? So I'm just like I'm curious how often you guys bring reader responsibility into mind when you are writing your stories, right? Because, and I can give some context and give you guys a second to think about it as well, like. You know, when people read They Both Die at the end, they're like, well, aren't you just sort of like doing the bury your gays trope? I'm like, well, my characters, first of all, I have like a gigantic like cast of like queer characters, right?
There's more than one gay to bury.
Yeah. And also, I mean, they're not dying because they're gay, because like as powerful as we are, like none of us have like proved immortality yet. So it's like that, and for me, so I mean, my options are I'm the bury the gays guy, or I'm the write about straight characters guy, even though it doesn't feel true to me or interesting to me, to be honest. So I'm like, do I write authentically, or do I write inauthentically according to like how people's perceptions of me, right? And I'm always going to write about the thing that like gets me through, you know. And if it happens to do something for a reader, fantastic, right? But like I can't control that reaction. And I think if I try to be fully team do-gooder, that it wouldn't be quite as powerful coming from me, because those aren't the stories that I am working through right now. So I'm curious where you guys stand on reader responsibility, if that means anything at all to you.
It's something I try not to think a ton about, because the more I think, I mean, it depends, because obviously the readers inform a lot of our decisions that we make. But I was realizing as I was editing As Far As You'll Take Me that, you know, having just the thoughts of like reviews, trade reviews, Goodreads, like anything in my head was destroying how I was like wanting to tell the story. Because, you know, in As Far As You'll Take Me, they fall in love pretty quickly. And the point is it's a toxic relationship. So they kind of have to, for that to happen, because you are going in kind of blind and you're like, you wanted to excuse all of that. So I was able to pull that in. And then also there's a pretty strong eating disorder element to As Far As You'll Take Me that I took for my own life. And that was a challenge for me, because there's really, from all the books that I've read for queer disordered eating stories, there was only one narrative. And I really kind of wanted to show a different one and tie it in with anxiety and see why we make the choices we do. And that was always a challenge, because I felt the responsibility that this had to be responsible. I don't want to, you know, necessarily, I don't want to trigger anyone. Of course, I don't want anyone to come away thinking that eating disorders are, you know, in any way positive, which I definitely don't do. But I also didn't want I guess it's more that I struggle with how to portray it on the page because I wanted it to be realistic and wanted you to go along with Marty on the story and maybe not see, maybe you wouldn't fully understand why he made those choices, but you would ultimately get there by the end. So that was kind of my challenge, and like that did end up being a heavier element of the story, of course. But like with everything, you just kind of balance it out, you contextualize it within his whole journey. And I think what I'm happy with where it ended, but it is a challenge. I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, y'all are hitting me right where it hurts today, honey, because let me tell you this. So my first book came out last June, actually almost exactly a year from the time we're recording this, which is insane. And like as my book made its way into the world, I was working on my second book and my third book and a book in a different genre. And so like I'm reading reviews coming in for my first book as I'm like writing these other two things. And so all these concerns that I didn't have when I wrote You Should See Me in a Crown, it was just me and the page. Like I was just kicking it at the Bean in Union Square. Like nobody was going to read that book. It was just going to be my mom buying a couple copies. So I wasn't really worried about, public perception at all. And so then that shifts really rapidly, like after your first book comes out, because you then have to contend with all these other voices vying for space in your head and in your book. And so it was really, really difficult for me to tell a story that felt honest without doing like a You Should See Me in a Crown part 2. You know what I mean? Like, right. I can't write another Liz Leidy. She's done. Like, I'm not going to do another character like that. But also, I have to think about the fact that, like, Liz is a likable protagonist because she's incredibly smart. She's very selfless. She is obviously the victim of, a homophobic environment and community, and she's just trying to make the best out of a tough situation, so you can empathize with her even if you aren't in her shoes. But like, she's pretty much without flaw, and that's in part because she's a Black girl and she has to be twice as good to be half as liked or whatever. But I can't write every character like that. And so when I went into Rise to the Sun, they're queer disasters, both of them. One of them is just a chaotic bisexual who's just bouncing off the walls. She's like out of this planet, but like I love her so much because she makes so many real like mistakes that I understand because I was right there too, and I as I was drafting, I was like, this book is not going to be as popular as You Should See Me in a Crown because the protagonist is not going to be as easy to buy into. And so thinking a lot about like what my responsibility as a writer is, which is to tell stories that feel honest and also like put good things out into the world. And I don't mean good in terms of like always happy necessarily, but good in terms of like this actually has value to somebody's life at some point. Like that's my job. The reader's job is to read empathetically and try to, think of books as not just mirrors, but also windows into other experiences, right? And so like, I hope that, we as readers can be smarter and more generous and more empathetic, but Goodreads is not the space for most of those things.
Nope.
Yeah.
And so like, I find that, blocking myself from all of that, chatter is like the way to get through a draft.
And just want to say, sorry, something really quickly. I found that with As Far As You'll Take Me, because I did something very similar where it was like, I'm writing something very honest, authentic, very me, like, I hope people like it. As soon as it came out, I stopped caring about Goodreads. I haven't checked Goodreads in a long time. And I was because so much of myself is on that page, I was so worried about it. And then when it came out, I was like, oh, I don't care what people think. And I'm a person who cares what everyone thinks all the time. I was like, what the hell? I still care what people think about Gravity Bus. But As Far As You'll Take Me, I'm like, well, sorry.
It is what it is, right? Yeah.
I was going to say, I think it's interesting, the thing that you just talked about, Leah, talking about reader's responsibility and hope that a reader can approach it. I had a wonderful conversation last year with Bethany C. Morrow, where she brought up this really great point that a genius. Here's the genius thing that she said that has stuck with me for literally like a year and a half now, which is this notion that so many readers actually don't have literacy and competence, especially when it comes to groups that they are not familiar with. And so I see this with all of us, actually, which is people approaching our work in bad faith, or approaching it and analyzing it in the context of stereotypes and what is their stereotypical understanding of our communities. And it is something we all have to deal with as we are crafting these characters. Like, I think, you know, as you're talking about Liz Letty, I'm thinking about how so much of Each of Us the Desert was me so angry at how often people called Moss a cinnamon roll and just softened all the edges of that character in this really condescending, paternalistic way, where I was like, this character has so much thorniness to him and you can't see it because all you see is the cinnamon roll, and how gross that felt. And so I was like, fine, I'm gonna write a character who from the first page is like, literally tells the reader, I don't care about you at all. Like, just from this, don't care about you. Right. I'm gonna make you angry. Here's why, you know. And then Adam, you know, I get I'm the Bury Your Gaze author too, because I have a queer character who dies in my first book. And it is, I would like to think, is very clearly, obviously, the point of the book, but often people, I wrote it in response to Buffy the Vampire Slayer doing that. This literally Anger is a Gift is a 116,000 word response to the episode Seeing Red. So that's how, first of all.
160,000 words?
16, sorry, 16.
Okay. Oh, I heard that too, and I was just panicking.
I'm like,
that's like
never.
I was like, that's more than all my books.
No, no. But I wrote, you know, what I hoped was a very real depiction of police brutality and what it means to lose someone, that sense of loss, and what it means to have potential crushed. And some people's competence is just, you killed a queer character, therefore or bad, and this is an immoral or an amoral book. And I'm like, you don't have to like it, you don't have to read it, but like, just come at it with like, maybe as a queer person, the craft that's going into this has a very specific point. And so I love, Phil, that like you get to that point of just, I care what people in my community, well, some people in my community, not everyone, like I care somewhat what people in my community feel. But like, no, you definitely have to get to a point where, you know, hopefully your friends in your life and my colleagues can check me, can like give me real good constructive feedback. My editors certainly do. But there comes a point where like you can't, those voices can be so hard when you're writing a new project and you can just hear them in your head. You can't write, you don't know how to do this, you're a bad queer author or whatever. And so I, you know, like everyone else, I try as much as possible to just, those are whispers in the wind. That sounds much more beautiful than it actually is, but you know.
Yeah, it's just really like sort of, you see this a lot from like Twitter especially, which I mean, what a hellhole, but like people who think they are smarter than other people like within the community or whatever. Like, I mean, people who are literally not queer, like talking to me about like Bury Your Gaze. I'm like, so you picked up a cute like couple words from Twitter and now you think that you're like the pro on this, that like you're in this. I'm like, no. And then if I saw someone tweet at me today, like, can you give us a hint about your next book? We know it's going to be queer. I'm like, maybe it's not. Maybe it's not going to be queer, and maybe that pressure shouldn't be forced on me either, right? Because maybe I got bills to pay, and
make that money.
Think on it.
Yeah, and it's like, and maybe like it's really difficult sometimes, like writing for a community that I love so much and I'm so proud to be part of, but like doesn't deny the fact that there are libraries and bookstores across this country that will never carry my work, you know, or not in this lifetime at the least, right? And like that's really difficult. But you know what they will carry if I write about like a straight white cis protagonist doing straight white cis stuff, and because like all of a sudden that is like mainstream. So these are like the choices.
I kind of want that now that you said it. Like your interpretation of what a straight white cis person's average day is like, like that's almost dystopic in a weird way. Like
it's really boring. Like, oh, so you're like not making out with other queer people?
Oh,
you're like, oh, cool.
Or like go to the bank
people, and I just but you know, these are the things that a lot of, and I talk about this too with a lot of like straight white cis like colleagues, where it's like you don't think about this ever. Like I know how hard it'd be for you to now be like, oh man, like is diversity like the cool thing now or whatever? Whereas like should I be like diversifying my characters? It's like, see, like you're now like projecting this thing, whereas like we're weighing like the costs and benefits of us writing ourselves. Like we are not playing at the same league, you know, and that can be really difficult, and really does, like, I mean, I'm writing a book that is very different than everything I published before, and I don't know how people are going to respond to it. Like I'm actually nervous to start. Mark knows what it is, but like I'm really nervous to start talking about it because people are gonna be like, wait, so it's not this thing that like we come to you for? Like, bye. And I'm gonna take that personally, you know? Yeah. But it's also the story that I'm interested in telling right now, and I can't just perform all the time and give readers what they want. Like, that's not my job.
Yeah, it's also pretty draining because we're putting so much of ourselves in our books, and then we have to put it out there. But then we also have to present it in this really marketable, high concept way to convince people to buy it. Meanwhile, librarians will just see two boys holding hands on the cover and laugh. It's always a challenge because it's like I do understand that it's like, oh, people are like, oh, well, I see more Black people, more queer people like getting book deals in Publishers Weekly, but like still, if you scroll through the list, like it's still not that high of a percentage if you really want to go through it. But
here's a brutal reality. More Happy Than Not is a book that had the queerness like put on the back of in the jacket copy. History's All You Left Me was really clear because he talks about Griffin's ex-boyfriend. They Both Die at the End is my first book that didn't specify anyone's queerness in the summary. Guess which book is my first to hit the New York Times hardcover list? And it's like, but that was intentional. It was sort of like, I remember even wanting to at one point remove Mateo and Rufus's last names, Torres and Emeterio, because I was like, will white people pick this up? Like right now, like white people can't tell that they're Latinos, right? So it's like,
squint really hard.
Oh, I don't see a sombrero. They're probably white, because like they're racist and stupid. But like, I am literally just like, this is how you have to like think with the Infinity Cycle. Like we didn't make that clear either. That it's about like the 3 of the 4 narrators are queer. Like that's not clear in the jacket copy. I also think that was like kind of like a failing point for this book because I think more people want to know that it's like queer fantasy and we're going to change that. But it's still a thing that you think about because I'm like, I want a straight person in the airport to pick up my book. And then find themselves reading it and being like, oh, wow, queer people are cool too, and like changing their perceptions. But there's so much that goes into like just thinking about how you're going to market your book that is so exhausting.
Yeah, and I think that actually happens even when, like, just to speak to like the querying authors in the room, the authors on submission, the people who just joined this because they think they might write a book, like just to speak to them for a little bit. Does anyone have any advice on like, I know we're talking about like step 830 of publishing a book, and you might still be on like step 4, and that's fine no matter where you're at. But like, how does this translate? Like, what if somebody is out there right now thinking like, oh, I have this story I really want to tell, but I don't know if people will buy it, because I certainly had the same thoughts.
Yeah. I think what we're talking about right now is like the gross intersection of capitalism and art making. Is that I think like as an artist, I have a moral responsibility to put like work into the world that I'm like proud of, but also that does stuff that I think has like there is a moral imperative to the work that I'm doing. And like I know people are gonna hear that and be like, oh, she writes rom-coms. Like how serious could it be?
They're serious.
Let me tell you, love stories do have the ability to change the world, okay? I really wholeheartedly believe that. And not just love stories, but stories that show us ourselves back to us and tell us that who we are is valid and worthy of life and love and, freedom from shame. So, like, I very much believe that, like, my job is right here. Y'all can't see my computer, but it's right here. This is it. Like, what happens after the book comes out, that's not my business. I was talking to my friend Rosie, Roseanne A. Brown, author of A Song of Wraiths and Ruins. Go buy it at your local independent bookstore. I was talking to my friend Rosie about this recently because we debuted on the same day. And so, like, obviously we've been on the same roller coaster together this entire way. And now that we have a year behind us to look at what's happened with our books, everything that happened after my book came out, that has really made a difference in terms of like who it reached and how many copies it sold and how much money it made, whatever. those things were all totally outside of my control. The thing that I did control was crafting a book that I was proud of and like making a character that I would have been honored to know that I could make when I was 15, 16 years old. And so like to anybody who's like at the beginning of their journey, the rest of this is just fun. This is like money making stuff. Like we're still figuring it out. We don't have the answers either.
We just want to be rich. Like that's it. It's very simple.
I gotta say, like this is where you go for the big bucks. But no, if don't go on this if you want to make money. But that said, you know, like the capitalism thing that's like separate, and like the bookmaking is my job.
But also, but it's sometimes not. Like sometimes it literally is like writing a book is not a weekend affair, right? Unless you're Mark.
Right.
And
like, okay, it's
Mark has written like 3 or 4 books this year. You know, it's like so yes, exactly.
Turning them out.
But literally, sometimes you do have to weigh in, like, and it sucks, and I hate saying this, right? Especially during Pride Month, but it's like I don't ever want to create the illusion that writing about queer characters is like a surefire bet to have what you are probably, whatever your metric of success is, that's individual to every person, right? That is not going to be a guarantee. Like the reality is some bookstores won't carry your book. Some publishers, some international publishers are not going to acquire your book. And just like everything that you're going to see for a lot of your like straight white colleagues or whatever, all those doors aren't necessarily going to open for you. You're going to also like, I outsell so many books that have adaptations and I don't. I'm like busting my ass to like get stuff made. And if I were writing about straight people, I have to think that it wouldn't have been this hard, you know? But you do find like, oh, we've already kind of done a gay thing already. So it's like, you've also done 7 Jason Bourne movies and like, and you've done 20 Fast and the Furiouses. It's like,
how many Willy Wonkas do we need?
Oh my God, yeah.
I tell you what, we don't need that origin story.
But now he's sexy. It's like, we get it.
Yes, but and I say this not to deter you, but I just want to be honest because I know I want to be I so badly want to be the person that tells every queer person, just write your truth. Like you'll find your audience, and you will find audience and people that your book will be deeply meaningful for. People will come out because of your books. It's going to be an intensely personal like conversation, but I also don't want to pretend that it is like flood out the gate. Everything's going to happen for you.
I love that you brought that up too. About the response to it too, because this is something I just sit down with the lovely Alex London early on after Anger's a Gift came out, and we had this conversation. Actually, I think I've had this conversation with you too, Adam, which was you write these books, and that's the thing. Like I remember being, querying agents on Anger's a Gift and how frequent. And I mean, you all know this. What I'm going to say. I couldn't connect with this character. Do they have to be this and this? I don't know who to sell this to. That's literally your job. If you don't know how to sell, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Your job. Anyway, we don't need to get into that. But, I wrote a book that if you look through a lot of the negative reviews, it's forced diversity. This book is too gay. It's not realistic that there's this many characters. And then I do these school visits and I meet these kids. And there is a thing that happens when you craft complex queer characters, when you put that much care and love into the page, is that this person who's never met you, who doesn't really know anything about you except for what's in a bio and maybe the curse things you tweet at 3 a.m, which is why I can't tweet in the middle of the night anymore. But this thing started happening where I suddenly was the safest person in the room. I've lost count at this point how many times a teenager has come up to me and waited until everyone left the room to then immediately come out to me and be like, I am deeply unqualified. Like I should not be getting this information. But you also, having been someone like me, being in the closet in high school, I get it. If I had seen one queer person in person, I may have felt the same like courage to talk to them. And so there's that other angle of it too, is that we are there's not a straight cis writer who really has to deal with it on that level. Like I've definitely talked to some straight cis writers who have written books about things like domestic violence or eating disorders and people confess to them. But I'm like, it happens all the time. And it's still happening even as we're doing virtual. Was it this week where kids privately messaged me on Zoom to tell me, oh my God, you use pronouns other than he, him. I use this pronoun, but I'm afraid to use it. And like, I'm like doing this visit and then also like chatting with them. But like, it's a weird thing that they don't, you know, I wish there was like an author school where they just like hear the thing. How can we start that? Because I wish I'd known to prepare for that eventuality.
I want to say this too about like this idea of like author school. So I thought the MFA was author school. I thought you went and they taught you everything you needed to know to be a professional writer. I showed up, gave them my little 70 thou or whatever I paid to go, and believe it or not, walked away not only with no idea how to write a book, but also no idea how to be a professional writer. So my advice to like early career writers is like, definitely, you know, like Adam, you're raising a really interesting and important point, and that's like, you know, we live in a world in which like we have to monetize the things that we do if we want to make money from them, obviously. So like it is something that we have to consider, but like at the end of the day, like you're not going to know until you know. Like you got to sit down and write the thing and figure out whether or not the thing can sell, or figuring out whether the thing is actually even any good, which it might not be, and then you scrap it and start over, whatever.
Right.
But like this is an ongoing, like ever evolving process, even after the book is done and you're on this side of things.
100%. Like, I mean, you think about like Benjamin, who wrote Aristotle and Dante Discovered the Secrets of the Universe. Like, dude had like 8 books before that one, and people are like calling Aristotle and Dante his like debut, right? Because, but also like they weren't as like queer as like Aristotle and Dante. So it's like, and so that's a perfect example of like someone who was writing a bunch of like heterosexual like stories or whatever, and then had this like major breakout gay book, you know? So I'm like, I don't want to like scare him, but I just want it to be like a little realistic. And as someone who like, I'm pretty dedicated to like only writing like queer characters. So like, even for all my like caution there, it's still something that I've like chosen to do, you know? But yeah, it's a tricky space, and it is going to be case by case. And some of us are going to be more privileged to pursue certain spaces than others, but you know, that's everyone's personal individual business.
Yeah, I would say one thing for anyone in the audience who is struggling right now as a querying author, is you really want to start flexing that muscle of whose critique matters and whose critique is just noise. And that's something that I didn't know before The Gravity of Us came out. And I've had to kind of, I don't know, work backwards and try to like figure it out now that I have 2 books out, and like my 3rd's coming out soon, and I have to like be better about it. It's an ongoing process, but it's something you can do now, especially as you're getting all of this feedback from agents and from editors potentially. And it's challenging because I've found that like with The Gravity of Us, like with its great commercial success came a whole lot of feedback that I did not want to hear, that wasn't relevant, that hated the fact that, I don't know, they were gay, or that, you know, that there wasn't I actually got an email saying that it was unrealistic that there was no homophobia on the page in the book. And it's just like, and Leah, I think we've talked about this before, because it's very similar. Like when you focus on queer joy, people are like, well, where's the pain? And then if you focus on queer pain, people are like, where's the joy? And so like, there's no win. There's literally no way to win. But because it has been so kind of commercially successful, then I've had readers in my DMs, you know, who are teens and are just like kind of figuring themselves out, saying like, this was the perfect book I needed this at this exact moment. And then you're like, okay, well, if it had to go through 800 crappy people's opinion to get to you, then it's worth it. But it takes you a long time to like get in that mindset. So I think if you do think this is a very like mission driven book that you're writing, I mean, all of our books should be mission driven in some, you know, you have a goal. That's why you're writing a book. While you're focusing on that, I think just think that there's going to be a lot of feedback that you're going to have to kind of juggle and figure out what is right and what is wrong and what is not for you. And you can't not do that, because you know, then you get the good comments that like really hit and are really impactful, I think.
I have a question, since we're all sort of bouncing around this subject. We've like come close to talking about it, but haven't really, which is, how do you deal with this as you're creating characters when you are borrowing from or directly taking from your own life? And you had mentioned this earlier, Phil, too, about like when you know, Gravity, or as far as It'll Take Me, is so personal. So I mean, like for me, it's like, oh, I just don't read Goodreads. I can't. You know, there's so many personal things in my book. And I got, you know, I had an experience very early on with a trade review that called a certain part of Anger is a Gift the most unrealistic part of the book. And they said that the logic of the book fell apart because of it. And I was like, that's the one thing that's like 100% true. And it took months for me to get that out of my head, which is people will never believe you, which is not true because many people do. But it's that whole adage of like a negative comment will always sting more than a happy comment makes it better. So how do you navigate this world as you're creating characters who do draw from your personal experience?
I mean, honestly, I had the same situation with As Far As You'll Take Me. I think it caused me so much anxiety. And I was thinking that my second book, I would be able to like let go a little bit because it's like, oh, well, I already have more other deals. Like, you know, if it doesn't have like the best sales, that's fine. Like, at least I got this story out in the world. And like, sounds great on paper, but like when it's actually coming out and you're like, oh God, my life is in here. And, you know, the one great thing I would recommend is having a therapist that is not just you writing yourself in a book. Because it was really challenging because I specifically talk about religion. My relationship with religion in there is Marty's relationship with religion, also eating disorders and anxiety in ways that I had never talked to my family about, and friends from college or from high school don't know about. And so it was really hard because I was like, I need to get this out there. I want to get this in the hands of the right people, the people who need it. But I don't want to go back and be like, hey mom, I had an eating disorder in college. Like I didn't want to have that conversation. And like, I think it was fine for me not to have it. And like, we didn't end up talking about it, but I think, you know, they knew so much of my life was built into that story. But once I mean, that was the hardest part for me. And also because I get tons of comments like, this isn't really realistic or, you know, whatever. And I'm like, well, I did it. So like, it must be somewhat realistic. Or it's like, I don't understand his choices. I'm like, well, he's messy. Like, what's the point? And so I just like, I'm sorry.
It's not logical. Like, I think
it's like, first he's gay. So like, well,
there's that.
Strike one. Like, okay. Yeah.
Like, sorry to jump in, Phil, but this is the thing. Being a teenager is not a logical experience. It's emotion driven. It's hormone driven.
But adults want it to be, and I don't get it.
Chaotic. So, like, I think, you know, and I was thinking about this earlier after something you said, Mark, it's this idea of like positionality. Like, what is the position that I am coming into this with? What privileges am I entering into this reading experience with? What like just experiences am I coming into this reading with? And like, what am I taking from my life that I'm then projecting onto this narrative or projecting onto this character? And I think, like, first of all, you got to pull all that out of the reading of it, because otherwise you're going to be trying to stuff this story through full of stuff that ain't got nothing to do with me. That's not a Leah Johnson problem. That's a you problem. That's one. Two, like, I think to, you know, the point of like, how can you write such personal things in a book? I think like, if I had thought about the book as a thing that was going to be consumed by tens of thousands of people, which like my book has been since I wrote it, which was nuts to me, then I wouldn't have written it at all. And I mean, like, not one part of it would have been written, not at all. Like, I wasn't out when I wrote You Should See Me in a Crown. I wasn't even out when I sold it. Like, I didn't come out until the book, like to the day the book got announced in Publishers Weekly. That was when I set my mom aside and I said, look, you're going to read this. Let me just go ahead and let you know.
You wrote a nice text, ran away.
Zoomed away.
Sorry, go on. Sorry.
You want to talk about like some like queer chaos. Like, that was very chaotic of me. But I will say, like, you know, I had to figure out a way to separate who Liz is from who Leah is. And like, even though like we share those things, there's a lot of elements of her story that did come from my story. Like, she is a figment of my imagination. And so like, her decisions are no longer my decisions. Her experiences, though they are mine in some ways, had to be shaped to fit the, you know, context of this book. And so like, I had to start imagining her as somebody who was fake instead of like Leah Johnson light, you know what I mean? And so when I was able to shift my own thinking and shift my own logic, then I was able to like, you know, approach the marketing and the promotion of the book in a way different way. And that took many months after the book came out, mind you.
Yeah.
To figure out, but I got there eventually, maybe, mostly.
It's really interesting because like also I came out like, I mean, I was out to like my mom and like some close friends, but when I realized I was like going to be querying a book about like a gay Puerto Rican from the South Bronx who has literally my initials, Aaron Soto, I was like, okay, I think anyone who's ever been suspicious is going to be able to kind of put one and one together, unless they're like wildly stupid, which to be fair, there are some wildly stupid people in my life, but but I did come out because I was like, I'm gonna have to, right? Like you can't write a story this personal. But something I did make clear with my first agent was I was like, yes, the story is really personal to me. Completely take that out of your brain. You do not know what parts of this are from my life, and you do not know what I had to make fiction just to kind of, because also like, look, I know how painful something was for me, does not mean it translates to interesting fiction, you know? So like I had to at some point, like I love Leah Johnson light. Like I've always just been like, Aaron Soto is not Adam Silvera. Like we have a lot of things in common, and you know, some people like to pretend we're unicorns because we're gay Puerto Ricans, so we can't exist. We can't have like that dual identity. But like, yeah, white editor from Random House who I haven't forgotten. But
I'm still checking you, whoever it was. I'm checking you. Don't think I'm letting up.
I'll DM you. Yeah, I don't care. I tell people, but yeah, but I did make a point where I was like, yes, like my stories are really personal for me because also it was really therapeutic for me because I couldn't afford therapy at the time. You know, like I've just been seeing a therapist for the past like year and a half now, right? But I got through so much that I wasn't able to talk about for so long because it was so closeted, and then just like traumas. I had the same thing with like that Phil was speaking to with like the eating disorder, like all my like suicidal stuff. I had to like talk to my mom about that. That was harder than coming out as gay. You know, like, you know, my mom was always going to be cool, like I knew that, right? But like my mom having to hear me wanting to die, like I'm her baby, you know, like that was like really brutal for her. And that's why I'm like such an open book now in like so many arenas of my life, because I'm like, I just kind of put it out there anyway. Like there's really, it's kind of hard for me to like go back now, but I love how it provides an opportunity to really like connect with readers who get it, you know, like Mark, like the readers who come to you at the end and they're coming out or they want to talk about mental health, and stuff like that, you know. And I'm like, look, I'm not a therapist, but I can tell you like what's kind of worked for me, and like, and you know, but it's but yeah, I mean, editorially, when it comes to like writing personal stories, I'm just like, we have to put out a book. This is not a memoir. So if something's like not making like a ton of sense or whatever, we can't just like chalk it up to like, oh, well, I'm like really sporadic or whatever. Like, let's do the thing that we can to like make this like the best book possible. Because you have to create some separation. Otherwise, I think it risks suffering.
I had a really interesting interaction. Last month I finished my next YA book, and I had gotten pretty far in it and was talking with my editor. And so I gave her some of it to read, and she'd given me feedback. And she did something that I never had an editor do and it required me to literally rewrite everything that I had written. Is she said, you know, part of what I like about reading your books and editing them is that you can find the truth, and then she's like, I think of it like a wound, and then you hold your thumb on it, and you make the reader sit in reality. And you do it in this really interesting way where you don't let people look away and be like, oh, that's whatever, who cares what that is or whatever. And with my newest manuscript, she was like, there's none of that energy and spark in it. And she actually encouraged, like, I think you actually need to make this personal. Like, I think you actually lean into something you are not. And I can see you deliberately doing every time you get to something that might be perceived as too Mark Oshiro, like too much of your own life, you veer off into something else. And I was just like, well, yeah, because I wrote two incredibly gut-wrenching, very personal books. I kind of don't want to do that. And then I sat with it for like a week and was like, God damn it, she's right. I hate it when this happens because she's always right. And but then when I finished writing the book, I was just like, God damn that. I don't know. I think what's so compelling about doing that is to pull a kernel of something that you've gone through, either a singular experience or something you went over for a long period of time. There's something really satisfying about like how how can you take this thing and distill it into another story? Like, I find it very intellectually satisfying to be like, I did not, like, my next book is about two boys trapped in a cult. Like, it's not really autobiographical. I mean, kind of is. We'll talk eventually. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I'm going to have to figure out, how do I talk about my childhood where I was basically in a cult? Like, it's a weird thing that I never talk about publicly. I'm going to have to figure it out. I'll probably figure it out 6 months after the book comes out, because I feel like that's like the schedule to figure out how to talk about it. But I'm finding it easier and easier with each project to actually lean into the personal and to do this thing where I pull. I don't know. I think that's going to be my thing. Like, if there's any brand, it's just Mark takes his life and then punches you in the heart with it. That's a pretty good brand.
That's a good one. That's a great brand.
Fair,
yeah. New Twitter bio for sure. Yeah.
There we go.
I think this is not at all what the question was, but I've been thinking a lot about it since.
First question. I don't know.
Who's to say?
We're just chatting.
To the idea of like cultivating an author brand, or like what kind of books are the books that I write. I think the only thing that is, integral to your author brand is like, what am I doing that nobody else is doing? Like, how am I telling this story in a way that somebody else could not tell it? Yep. We have seen so many cis straight white love stories over time that, like, really the burden of proof is on like cis straight white women to figure out how to tell books, like tell stories in a way that feels original. But like for us, I feel like we're still so early on in like what the queer, kidlit canon is going to be, that there's so much space to just like carve out whatever your little niche is going to be. And so like when you're trying to figure out what stories to tell, I do think that like for me the value comes from telling, writing books that are like, ain't nobody else doing what I'm doing the way I'm doing it. Know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think even if a lot of people had said with As Far As You'll Take Me, because it is a little bit, it's not a coming out story really, but it is of kind of figuring your sexuality out along the way kind of story, and people didn't like that, as well as there are people who don't mind it, and then there are people who are like, oh, another coming out story. And I feel like that's just, I still told like my unique story with my with some of my own experiences, with some other things that I thought only I could tell. And that was my whole point going in. I wasn't going in to be like, oh my God, will people like this? And then this is kind of the point we've had this whole conversation really has been like, figuring out what is an actual piece of feedback and what is a venting session on the internet.
Right. And
it's hard to tell sometimes, but
yeah,
I feel like that's our journey. That's what every author has to deal with from the very first time they even put their pen down to the paper, is like figuring out what is your story and like what pieces of feedback actually mean anything to you, and what we can just kind of evaporate and not think about anymore.
Yep.
Very that. I feel like I have one question. I know we're like pushing up on time, but I did want to ask this while I have you geniuses in the room. Question for folks who that might have sounded a little snarky. I actually really meant it. I realized sometimes my tone is.
It felt sincere.
Okay, great. I was like,
I don't know Reese, so I mean, it's a different level, I guess. But.
Phil, I don't want to know. Okay? Sometimes the pitch is off, so I can never tell. Anyway, for you all who are like a couple books in now, like these like all pros in the room, how do y'all sit down and like craft stories and characters in a way that feels fresh, not just to you, but like different from stuff you've already done before? And I know some of y'all are switching genres a little bit, so it's like maybe a different kind of question, but like.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an authentic way to do it. I mean, like, I feel like many people feel the urge to go to fantasy, for example.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I can, because I just started my 8th book, and this is the one that it's like different than all the other ones. Yeah, I'm with you. And I mean, it's hard. Like, I mean, the other night was just me outlining. So I tend to start with, I started this with the Infinity Cycle, where I had 4 narrators and was like, okay, they need to have really distinct voices. I need to like really figure out who they are before I even start trying to write them or whatever. So I wrote down a list of 10 random details about them. Nothing that like had to be tied into plot, right? So Emil, who's like the Infinity Son, he is like our gay chosen one and everything. I had written 2 random details that included he likes baggy t-shirts and he hates Instagram. Of all those things, I just kind of sat with them, and then as I was writing his voice or whatever, I realized he wears baggy t-shirts and he hates Instagram because he's insecure about his body. And I absolutely have like body dysmorphia, you know, I talk about it with my therapist like regularly. But that was like, I'd never written about that before, you know? So, but like just by kind of like scrambling together those like little details or whatever, I did get to write something that was like both personal to me and felt fresh. And now I'm doing a similar thing with these new characters for this next book. And I'm having so much fun putting together random details because I'm like, it's going to take me somewhere like really honest, you know, but it does get tricky. And I've straight up told my publisher and my agent, I'm like, I'm not going to tell the same story twice. Like, I know that you guys want more of this, want more of that. I was like, that is like the death of art for me. Like, I would be so bored, just like recreating. Like, there are some characters, I mean, some writers who like will tell successfully so many stories in the world. I'm just like, oh my God, like I'm in a trilogy and I'm kind of done. Like, I'm like book 3 is like, I remember wanting it to be like 7 books. I'm like, oh, thank God. Like, book 3, I'm even taking a little break from that right now. So I need to kind of like, you know, just like cleanse the palate a bit, you know? So I can't imagine like telling the same story like 12 times in a row. I'm like, oh my God, it seems so boring. So yeah, for me, it has to be fresh. And you know, also as you grow, this last thing I'll say, you do come across like new trials in your life. And if you are someone who like kind of is okay with like cribbing from yourself, you know, there are going to be new things to kind of like put on the page that weren't there years before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, switching genre helps. It does. And I feel very lucky that I'm with a publisher who from the beginning, I was like, I just want you to know, I will never write, like, I'm just going to bounce from one genre to another. And they're, you know, 15 is like, go ahead, Mark Oshiro. Which is great. I like that I have that because I agree with you, Adam. Like, if they ever came to me and like, your next book has to be contemporary or your next book has to be this, as soon as that thought entered my mind, it has to be this, I don't even think I'd be able to write it, right? It would get in the way so much. So that helps. Being able to switch genre helps. Being able to write in different age groups helps, because writing for middle grade, I mean, I know you're doing that, Leah, right now. Very excited for this book, but like even that, like the mindset, you know, writing The Insiders was such a huge relief and but also a challenge because you just don't think the same about the world when you're 12. Like, you know, I described it in a panel I did recently where it's like, if you're 12 and something happens to you, you're like an angry tomato and you have like one thin layer of skin and then the pulpy anger underneath. And then if when I write for YA, I think of everyone as like a poisonous onion. Like there's 7 million layers to everything, because by the time you get 16, 17, 18, you're starting to get cynicism. You're starting to understand your position in the world, both your role as a person, your role as your gender, etc. All these things are coming in and it just complicates you more. So that makes it easier to not necessarily write the same character. But in the end, like I actually think about it like bands and musicians. Like let's go here, because I feel like this is a safe space to do this. Let's talk about Paramore. Part of the reason of why I love Paramore so much is every album you have no goddamn clue what you're going to get. And everyone write the art and the music that they want. And even better, as their career has gone on, it's gotten further and further from what they started as, but it's always them. And that's the kind of career I want. You know, having grown up with the bands that have lasted with me, that I feel like have grown with me, that I still listen to 20 years later, those are the ones that change every single album. And so I want that in my book career, is everyone is like that new album where you can see the things that are somewhat similar to the last one, but most of the time you feel like you're being shoved off a cliff. Nicely shoved off.
Gently.
It's a violent metaphor. I don't really like it now that I've said it.
But it's already done. You're already careening.
Yeah, it's out there. They're fine.
Yeah, I love that. And it's been a challenge. Like I just finished writing and editing my 4th contracted book, and then I'm about to start writing my fifth, which like doesn't feel real because I feel like Gravity came out like yesterday.
Like, how are you catching up to me?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm catching up. 2 books a year.
Yeah.
I made a mistake.
He doesn't stop. This is ridiculous. I'm looking around at him. I'm like, why do y'all
Yeah, I just finished my 6th, so I'm on my way.
Oh my god, that's But also,
Yeah.
Mark, you debuted 2017 or 16?
18.
Oh,
Yeah.
man, neither. Okay. I was like I was like, you were just 1 year or 2 years behind me. Like, no.
No.
Yeah. I mean,
Sorry, Phil,
no. It's challenging, and like one is middle grade, which is great. But I feel like both of the stories that I'm putting out next year have been really fun because I've been able to reflect more on like rural appreciation as opposed to the Gravity of Us and As Far As You'll Take Me, which is very much escaping to a better place, is like kind of the perspective, especially with As Far As You'll Take Me. And I always feel like each book should kind of counter the other in some way. And so I've found that like I want to actually, in my middle grade, I want to like have a world where it's like, yes, not everything is like peachy with you being gay, but you're still able to like kind of find your footing and say like, I actually love my small town, and I'm going to throw my first pride parade, and like that, my town's first pride parade, which is the premise of my middle grade. And like that was something that like just editing that, I was just like, oh my god, this is so refreshing and new. But it's still I so far everything that I'm going to write is contemporary. I don't see that changing. But who knows? But I feel like I've been able to at least find kind of new types of contemporary books to write, and even if that's like character or premise or what, there's something that makes it exciting for me. And as long as you get that little bit that's exciting, you can kind of take it and run with that.
Leah, do you have a sense on how you're going to handle this? Like,
I'm still figuring it out. I'm still feeling it out. I think part of it is that like I can only write. I'm so bad at like completing a manuscript. Like I know some people can just
really?
like churn them out. They got 8 of them in the drawer right now, waiting to be dusted off. I don't have that because I'm not going to finish a book unless it's coming out, unless somebody's publishing it. So
Same.
like, so I realized like the books that are, like the only books that I can sustain myself all the way through are books that are like exciting to me. So like I like writing about small town shenanigans, so You Should See Me in a Crown was a blast. Like I love music festivals. It's like my favorite place on earth. Like Rise to the Sun was a great time for me. And I love this idea of like, a little kid having limitless power and not knowing quite what to do with it, which is why my middle grade was a fun time. So I think that's part of it. And that's like my strategy right now. And also like shifting the gaze for each book. So GAZE for, I'm not really enunciating
But either.
but like, right. I think shifting the gaze for my books also like was really helpful to me. Like You Should See Me in a Crown is all about like blackness as it exists in opposition to whiteness, or like poverty as it exists in opposition to like having a lot of means. But Rise to the Sun was a book about 2 Black girls falling in love at a music festival. I didn't want to talk about white people. I didn't want to talk about whiteness. I didn't want to talk about homophobia. Like as far as I'm concerned, none of that even was like part of the story. So that was really fun for me to write. I doubt white people are going to love it as much since they are not centered, but that's okay. That's fine. We'll figure it out.
Yeah. It's not for you to figure out.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, we are well over time, so we should probably wrap this up. Thanks everyone for this fun conversation. Let's just go around and say where people can find us. I'll go first just quickly. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, lurking sometimes at STAMPEPK. But if you just search Phil Stamper, I'll probably show up. And the other Phil Stamper is a pro wrestler who's also very cool. So just follow us both. Just kind of tick down the list until you get me. And that's where you can find me.
I'm just Adam Silvera on everything. I'm not on Facebook because no. And so I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and also lurking on TikTok. Also, I am not Adam Silver, who is the NBA commissioner. So if you're mad about something that happens at the NBA, please stop yelling at me. I am not responsible. I cannot get anyone banned or reverse any bad calls that coaches made. Thank you.
I'm by Leah Johnson, so BY Leah Johnson on Instagram and Twitter. I'm probably talking about Dylan O'Brien as we speak, so just be ready for that.
I'm proud of you. I go by Mark Does Stuff everywhere. I am not the MMA fighter, Mark Oshiro, who is actually my second cousin, who reportedly doesn't want to talk to me anymore because they're mad that I now take over the Google results and you can't find him. But he hasn't won a match in like 3 years, so get better.
It's his fault.
Cousin Mark, come on.
Yeah, come on, cousin Mark. He's
Tighten
literally
up.
lost everything for like 3 years, and I'm like, win a match, maybe you'll get a news story.
Damn.
Get him.
He's gonna watch.
That book, by the
The
way.
worst part is I know he can beat me up. Like if there's no competition here. Like he can absolutely destroy me. But whatever, it's fine.
Maybe not. He's not winning any matches. So.
No. Oh,
Well, yeah, actually, maybe not.
Hey,
All right. And part 2, we'll just we'll explore that a little bit more. Have a
Thanks,
little
everyone.
thing.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Bill.
thank you so much for joining Pride Book Fest 2021.